Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Today, Contra Costa Taxpayers Association has a great guest speaker. It's Robert Brown from Western States Petroleum Association. He'll be talking about what's going on in who the association is and what is going on in the petroleum industry currently. If you have questions, I'll ask you to use the chat feature and I'll monitor them and we'll hold on to them until the end. But if there is something that is on the topic being discussed and needs a clarification, I'll let our speaker know and he can put it in. So with that being said, I'd like to welcome Bob Brown to our speaker series. It's great to have you with us and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Sue, and thanks, Denise, for the opportunity to be here today. I've had a chance over the last year or so to join some of the Taxpayer Association breakfasts and look forward to being able to be back in person again, hopefully soon. Hope everyone out there is safe and healthy and well. Certainly been a challenging year all the way around 2020 with COVID, of course, the fires, the resulting impact on the economy. And I'm here today to talk a little bit about how our industry, the petroleum industry, has kind of weathered through a lot of these challenges where we are today. So I'll start out a little bit about WSPA, go through a brief slide deck, talk a little bit about how we're structured and how our industry is present here in the Bay Area, in our region, particularly in the East Bay, and a little bit about the economic impacts overall to the state of California as well as to the Bay Area region. A little bit about all the taxes and regulations that go into producing and refining oil in the state of California and how that differs from the rest of the nation. So we get a little bit of comparison, and then a little bit about some of the energy, the power outages we've had in the last few weeks, and our contributions there, and look forward along the way to have any questions or any dialogue, but also take some questions at the end. So we can go ahead and pop up the title slide there, Denise, thank you. So here's a little bit about, if you go onto our website, WSPA.org, you can learn about our member companies, a little bit of our history, a lot of the key issues that we work through and who works for WSPA. We're a nonprofit trade association. We represent about 25 different companies with a presence in 5 states: California, Oregon, Washington, Arizona, and Nevada. Our physical presence, from a standpoint of the 35 or so employees that we have at the trade association, the base of them are in Sacramento, but we also have a lot of activity where we have refining and production. The refining in the Pacific Northwest in the state of Washington, as well as the Bay Area, Southern California, and then production where we produce, extract and produce the oil and get it ready for refining in Kern County predominantly, Bakersfield area, and a little bit along the coast, although that footprint is shrinking around the Santa Barbara, Ventura region. But it's these 25 companies that we represent include Chevron, Shell, PBF, Marathon, a lot of the big companies, as well as Berry Petroleum, California Resources Corporation, a number that are just into the era, that are into the production side of producing. So we can go to the next slide. Just a little bit about how we look from the refining side. Here in the Bay Area, we have five refineries here in the East Bay. 4 of them are in Contra Costa County. Those being Marathon, PBF, which used to be Shell, they're otherwise known as the Martinez Refining Company, Phillips 66 over in Rodeo, and the Chevron refinery in Richmond. And of course, Chevron also has their corporate headquarters in San Ramon. So a very big presence. And as you'll see momentarily, a huge job and economic impact here in our region. And then across the water up in Benicia is Valero. And actually that's where I got this slide. These next couple slides I kind of imported from a previous Valero presentation because I thought it kind of gave a good layout of how we look in the state. And then you'll see where we were in 1965, actually the year I was born, where our population was, the gas demand, gallons per year, 5.5 billion. There were 40 refineries in the state. You can see that's changed quite a bit. Population's gone way up and continues to increase, albeit it's slowed somewhat the last few years in California for a number of reasons. But the gasoline demand is huge, and I'll go into in some of the later slides a little bit more about some of the demand that we see. There are now 12 refineries in the state. That's soon going to be down to 11, because if you saw in the news recently, a lot of changes going on in our industry here in the Bay Area. With the onset of COVID, obviously demand, it was a huge impact on demand, which we're still feeling to this day. But demand dropped sharply in April, and Marathon Refinery went idle. And they haven't come out of that idle mode since the economy was shut down. And they recently announced they will be idled indefinitely. They are turning their refinery into a terminal. And so that's basically, they're going to stop refining traditional oil there, and it will be essentially a distribution, since they already have the infrastructure up there for storage and sending the crude through the pipelines. They will be what they call a terminal. So that'll be permanently idled. Their goal, however, as stated publicly, is to turn that facility into a renewable diesel plant. So if that comes to pass, it's going to take a couple of years to process all the permits and move that forward. So that's going to have a huge jobs impact, direct jobs just at that facility. We're about 750 Marathon employees. That's going to go down to about 50 when it goes to terminal status, which will be later this year. They'll start phasing down the number of jobs at that facility in October. So that definitely was a gut punch to the industry, and certainly to the employees there. The other announcement recently is over in Rodeo, Phillips 66. They actually have a kind of a interim refining facility in Santa Maria. They'll be shutting that one down in 2 or 3 years, and they're going to convert their refinery in Rodeo to a renewable fuels plant only. In fact, it's exciting. It'll be the largest renewable fuels plant anywhere in the world when it's done, and assuming it gets all the requisite permits. So there's, in the meantime, it'll continue to operate as a traditional petroleum refinery, as one of the current few here in the East Bay. So that is their transition plan. So you're seeing a great deal of shift, a great deal of news in our industry here in the Bay Area. And then we can go to the next slide. This one, I said I imported a little bit of information from Valero's slide. So this was California as an energy island. Is a term you'll hear a lot about California. We are, you'll notice that our prices are always some of the highest. Price per gallon of fuel is always some of the highest in the nation. And these are some of the reasons for that. We operate on what's the California Air Resources Board has regulated in terms of a reformulated gasoline. We have a winter and summer blend. It's a more expensive way to process it, but it's to meet certain air quality standards. We have logistical and geographic isolation, so we don't have pipelines coming into the state. If you look at where we get our oil from, about 30% of it comes in-state and is produced in-state, and we use it all. And that's down in Kern County, Bakersfield primarily, with a little bit still coming in along the coast. So that is all used within the state. And then the rest, we get about 10% from the Gulf of Alaska, and the rest comes in by ship and tanker from other countries around the world. So that's basically, it's a 30% in-state, 10% from Alaska, and 60% or so from other nations. Our regulatory agencies have significant authority. There's probably 30 agencies that oversee our operations. We are highly, highly regulated. And I'm going to get to a graphic later, which I think will resonate with this group because it breaks down all the different taxes that we pay per gallon of gas in California. And some of those are caused by direct taxes and others by regulations. But federal regulations from US EPA, Chemical Safety Board, Army Corps of Engineers, and on down, US Fish and Wildlife Service. The state CARB, Air Resources Board is one of the biggest. But Cal OSHA, a number of environmental regulations, safety regulations, as well as regionally. I do a lot of my work in the Bay Area for WSPA, in front of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, which is a 24-member board that regulates regional, local air quality regulations. And so the refineries here in the Bay Area spend a lot of time complying with permits and regulations as put forth by the Bay Area Air District. When it comes to safety regulations, environmental regulations, there is nowhere in the world, and I can assure you, that is more highly regulated in those terms than here in California and in the Bay Area. And I will say I started at WSPA about 4 years ago after being years in the auto club and insurance industry, AAA, and then 10 years in politics and government, mostly out of Sacramento, a couple years in DC. But I was really struck in my first few weeks being in this industry at the premium that our employees in our industry put on safety around the workplace. It is absolutely first and foremost the minute you set foot inside the property lines of an oil refinery or a production region, as well as the litany of regulations at the state, local, federal level that they have to comply with. So when we get criticism from activists who want to shut us down or keep that production in the ground, we're going to get to some of the demand figures later in the presentation, and I think you can see why that's not a good path for us to go in. I can assure you that no place will they produce and refine oil any safer and any more environmentally responsibly than here in the Bay Area. In fact, couple notes just to kind of give some context to it. Bay Area refineries emit about 2 to 3% of the pollutants that cause smog, and over the last 30 years, refineries have reduced emissions at more than twice the rate of other sources, and a greater than 60% reduction in criteria pollutants since 1990. So I will give credit to when I testify before the local air board that, you know, a lot of the cooperative communication and regulations that we have to comply with that are adopted by that board, as well as the operations of these refineries to do so in a responsible way to make sure we have access to safe, reliable, and affordable energy, that we've made real strides. And we're getting to the point where continuing to pass regulations onto these entities, you begin to have to look at what's the cost benefit analysis to some of these regulations. But I can assure you they're strong and they're vast. We can go to the next slide, Denise. Thank you. I'm going to run through these next few slides, talking about the economic impact of our industry, and kind of the not only the number of jobs, but the number of induced jobs, indirect jobs, whether it be consulting and contractors to direct refinery workers to all the economic activity that having a sizable employee base in a region, how that contributes to the local economy, the service industry, restaurants, so forth. And many of the workers in our industry live in these communities. So they give back a lot in terms of dollars to the tax base, and we'll get into a little bit of that as well. The LA Economic Development Corporation is the source of these next few slides that show the kind of the multiplier effect of jobs and economic activity. It's updated about every 3 years, so it's about 2 years in arrears. So you look at the 2019 report, the second half of last year this was released. So these are as current a stats as we have from this group. And we can go to the next slide. So I'll start with a little bit of the overall impact to the state, and then we can drill down, no pun intended, to some of the local and regional impacts. The assessment by the LA EDC in the recent report is 365, almost 366,000 total jobs supported by the oil and gas industry. So that's, the refineries that I mentioned, the production in the Central Valley and Coast, some production in LA County as well. You look at the number of direct jobs there, as well as all the transport, all the distribution, the pipelines, the producing all the jet fuel, which we do for air travel in the state of California. That's 100%. These are huge economic impacts, a huge number of jobs when you look at direct, indirect, and induced. And the tax contributions that go back into the state and local coffers obviously help for money that goes into public safety, healthcare, education, and infrastructure overall. And certainly, the tax base, the property tax base that they pay as corporations is a huge amount. And we can go to the next slide. Here's just a little bit about the employee diversity makeup. You can see about almost 30% Hispanic Latino, almost 11% Asian, 6% African American. It is a very diverse mix. We're going to get into also kind of the not only the number of jobs, but the types of jobs that this industry produces. And it doesn't always require a 4-year education, although we have those as well. I work with a lot of chemists and engineers in my day-to-day work, but we also work very closely with labor. Many of them, they have arrangements with the state building trades. So you've got apprentice programs and folks who've got vocational and trade education that can go directly from high school into some of these roles. So it really spans a great deal of work, and people from a variety of backgrounds. And many of these folks who you see here in terms of the employee distribution, as I say, live and work in these communities, whether it's Solano County or Contra Costa County. Next slide then, Denise. Here's a bit about as I mentioned, the types of jobs that the industry supports. It takes a lot to get our product out of the ground safely, refine it, transport it. You'll hear terms, if you talk to people in the industry, downstream, which is basically where the Bay Area is, that's refining. And then upstream is the production side. Midstream is kind of the transportation and material moving. And again, we have a lot of restrictions on that part of it. So we have to rely on maritime and marine transport of the oil into the state, because we don't have pipelines coming in, and we don't have crude by rail to any great extent coming into the state as well. So those options are limited. Again, that gets back to what we talked about earlier, which was the energy island. Did I see a question come in, or we okay right now?
Good.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go on to the next slide, Denise. Here's obviously the kind of living you could make working in this industry, and the breakdowns of salaries. You can see that in looking at the average annual wage and all the ancillary benefits, these are very good jobs in the community. And so when I said a gut punch on the marathon announcement and losing those jobs, it's a real impact. It's an impact to obviously those workers' lives and their contributions to the Bay Area here in those jobs and their families. And you can see these are good, solid jobs that support a family, that support the community, that goes back into our economy. And my hope is that both Marathon and P66 are successful as they transition from the fossil fuel refinement into kind of the next wave of renewable fuels. But I thought this was a powerful slide in the types of jobs that our industry provides. We can go to the next slide. Here's basically the breakdown by region. So for our industry in the oil and natural gas, when you talk about those direct jobs, and by direct I mean people working for those companies, and some of the contracted employees, seasonal employees that come in and support it as well. We're about 20% here in the Bay Area. I suspect that this chart will shift as we move forward, and maybe Southern California will become a bigger piece of that pie in the short term. But hopefully, that'll balance back out as we diversify the energy mix for what we produce and what we refine. Next slide. Again, this is where Bay Area again manages about 44% of the oil refining capacity in the state. You can see what the contributions to the state and local tax revenue. I think it's like one of every five public dollars in the county budget comes from our industry. It's a huge piece of it. And you look into communities like Richmond, like Vallejo, like Martinez, where they're huge employers. It's San Ramon. You could see the impact of having these companies and their sizable operations in these communities. And I will say, obviously there's when people look at kind of the manufacturing base and oil refining, we take being a good neighbor very seriously. And each of these companies have what they call community advisory panels, where people who live in and around their facilities, they have very common communications and sit downs with the companies, and have very good relationships in terms of neighbor ordinances, any kinds of issues that may come up. There's an immediate response and ability and communication channel for them to work through any issues and answer any questions. So, and we work very closely, as I mentioned, with the regulatory agencies, with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, with local fire departments, with many of these facilities have fire departments on their facilities. As I mentioned, safety is a first and foremost, and they are all 5 refineries look at their presence in the community as something that they obviously take very seriously. They want to be a good corporate neighbor, and I think their ability to work with each other in terms of sharing best practices when it comes to safety and environmental issues, working with the community. There's very much an open door policy, and so I kind of wanted to share that aspect of it as well. We can go to the next slide. Here's just, again, further breakdown of the wages and benefits, how they're reinvested in the local economy, the total economic contribution, and the total number of jobs sort of supported by the oil and gas industry. And just a little bit of metaphorical comparison. It's, 81,000 is enough to fill Oracle Park when they're doing baseball games in person nearly 2 times. And again, I understand these slides will be available, and I'm also available and can share my contact information for anyone who has any questions or follow up even after this call today. Next slide. Here I want to get into a little bit of kind of where, you probably feel the pain at the pump in terms of gas prices, and California is always ranked high in the nation in that regard, is largely because of that energy island I talked about in terms of getting product to market. The regulations that we have, there's no state that's stricter, I can assure you of that. You look at the recent 12-cent increase in the state gas tax that the voters kept in place. That is a 47-cent state excise tax. You've got a federal excise tax of 18, which I think was last raised in the Clinton presidential administration days. You've got a low carbon fuel standard, which was passed some years ago by the California state legislature, and the work and effort that has to go into producing these very strict low carbon fuel standards is another very costly aspect of regulations. As you all know in this group, regulations aren't without cost. The cap and trade measure, which was passed in 2017 and renewed, I should say, in 2017. All of this, came about in 2006 with GHG regulations and the cap and trade program in California, which was passed back in that era, was re-upped under Jerry Brown in 2017. You've got state and local sales taxes as well as underground storage tanks. So you can see about $1.12 in taxes alone. That is, I think, if not the highest in the country, I think we're close with Pennsylvania, Hawaii, and you'll see Nevada, Oregon. They get a lot of their fuel from us. Their prices remain kind of high, but California, given a lot of these rules and the high taxes, are certainly a huge piece of it. To the right of the pump graphic, you've got consumption numbers. Obviously, to that earlier slide, how much, you've got a state of 40 million people, about 30 million vehicles in the state. You've got basically about 90% of the vehicles in the state are powered by the product that we make and refine, all the jet fuel. So you've got very much, even though there's some roads being made in electric vehicles and renewable technologies and others, there's still about a 90%, even in the state of California, which is pretty progressive in terms of energy policies compared to other states. You've still got a large reliance on the fuel that we make. So we make it as safely and as environmentally responsible as possible, but you've got a strong consumer demand for our product, and you can kind of just see the consumed daily number of gallons as well as the barrels of oil processed in California refineries, it's significant. And that demand isn't going down. With a lot of aspirational goals that the legislature and that regulators put on our industry to continue to innovate, to continue to look at other ways of powering us. Certainly, our companies are doing that. I highlighted a couple that were making very significant plans here in the Bay Area to do that. But for the foreseeable future, we're still relying on largely this very traditional product, which does more than transportation. It's obviously part of our everyday modern life in terms of detergents, inks, cosmetics, glue, eyeglasses, synthetic fabrics, acrylic paint, fertilizer, drugs, such as aspirin. I mean, this is a product that people kind of sometimes forget that we use in so much of what we rely on in daily life. And then we go to the next slide. This is kind of, something that obviously we're concerned with when you're looking at, rolling blackouts and the legislature's push to kind of hear from I'll call them the activists who are very, very vocal, who show up at a lot of these meetings and demand that we, keep the product in the ground, that we close all the refineries, that we basically force a product toward electricity, toward alternatives. It is a very misguided policy in terms of knowing that we still rely so much on the fuels that we produce and refine, and natural gas is a big part of what we have to support our electricity in this state. And until we have a viable, long-term, sustainable, alternative, you really have to look at it overall as an energy mix. It's not, any one product. Ours is the major player, but you really have to look at a diversity and a diverse energy mix to support the transportation and support, how we live our everyday lives just to keep the lights on. So, our companies were able to, through a lot of effort, as you can see by the tweet here, and in responding to the crisis of the rolling blackouts recently, that we were able to put back quite a bit of power into the grid to kind of help alleviate some of the pressure on demand during this recent heat wave. And I think we go to the last slide here. These are just kind of some statements on the power outages, which I think kind of speak to where we're at. And one thing we've seen with the California Air Resources Board in particular of late is, whether it's their shipping at birth policy, which they adopted yesterday, to moving to all electric trucks. These are, if you look at the second statement here, the second paragraph, the blackouts are a direct result of unrealistic and we feel misguided all electric energy policies being forced on Californians. It's one part, it's a very important part of the energy mix, but we are certainly up against it politically in terms of how some in society look at, what we do and how we make our product. You're seeing a lot of natural gas bans in municipalities around the state. Again, very, very misguided. These are fuels that can be very, used very, very cleanly, and that should absolutely continue to be an option. And they're starting to force some of these policies on consumers. And when you're looking at taking away buildings providing natural gas, or forcing people to look at pushing toward getting rid of the internal combustion engine and all electric vehicles, if you look at the price of all electric vehicles, they're pretty high. And you look at a lot of these policies, and they're very regressive in terms of, communities that really rely on our product to get from A to B, to get from work, to get to school, to just have their basic mobility. We provide a product that can be used safely and relatively cleanly, and is accessible to these groups that some of these other options aren't as readily accessible in terms of energy options. Again, that's not to say that renewables aren't important. They are. And it's why so many of our oil and gas companies and the very smart people who work there and support them are helping bring renewables online and looking at being very innovative in terms of how they can continue to change and adapt to consumer needs. I think that's, you saw a lot of slides here and a lot of numbers about the number of people who work in and support our industry. Those are the very same people who I think are going to bring us to our energy future as we continue to refine and adopt to meet consumer demand, which is only going to continue to grow in the state. I think that might be my final slide. And I'm happy to kind of open it up for questions here.
Yes, we do have a couple of questions that have come in. First, I'll ask you, is there an estimated limit in the resource available?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's I don't have a figure for you. We've certainly got ample resources that we can continue to produce in the state, although that's dwindling to some degree. And we're seeing a lot of rules and proposed legislation in place that will do things like put mandatory setbacks into how far out you have to be from a particular production, or a lot of rules in place as to how you can access that crude. But there are limits, but certainly new kinds of technologies and how to extract it safely. And you're certainly seeing that in the U.S. become a net exporter of fuel in the last few years. The hydraulic fracturing technology that's been utilized in areas around the country has been certainly one technique in being able to get that product to market. So there's limits. I think we're going to be using these materials for a long time to come. So that's why we continue to make sure it's produced, refined in a safe, accessible, and environmentally sensitive way.
Okay. How many electric generating facilities powered by natural gas are left in the state?
Well, I think there's been some. I don't have that number. I don't have that number off the top of my head. I can certainly follow up on that. But
Okay.
there's definitely some calls to start to shut those down around the state. And I think I saw some tweets and updates. Given this last round of energy blackouts, that there may be the PUC and others are looking at that timeline, and the viability of shutting down those facilities may be misguided in terms of having some ample alternatives to support a state of 40 million people to keep the lights on.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to insert my own question. I happen to be a hybrid vehicle fanatic.
Yeah.
And I love my hybrids. And electric vehicles still need power. And so we talk about how much gasoline goes into cars, but how much electricity needs to be produced in terms of the petroleum industry in order to power electric cars, or an electric car?
Quite a bit. Natural gas is, I think, number 2. It's big. It's And I think when it comes to electricity, you've got to look at the infrastructure that's needed so that as competition, as innovation moves forward, you're seeing a few more options in the automaker industry in terms of hybrid technologies and electric vehicles, but it's still a very small portion of vehicles sold in the state when you're looking at the overall population. And having those power sources up and down the state is also going to take up a lot of power, a lot of natural gas, and a lot of other support to basically feed into that network. So I think that's the infrastructure is something that really needs to be invested in.
Interesting. I have another question here. Do you know where the electric power comes from in California? Just rough percentages.
I think it's largely from out of state and some in state, but a lot of it's brought in from different areas. Again, I should have updated my electricity support talking points for this, but I'll definitely can do some follow up on that part of it.
Appreciate that. I'll be sure to get back to our questioner on that.
Yeah.
He also asked, you mentioned California gas is sent to other states. How much, what's the approximate number there?
It's a good, we supply it all for just about for Nevada and Oregon. So it's quite a bit in terms of our neighboring states. I don't have the percentage that they use from our product, but I believe in Nevada's case, it's close to 100%.
Okay, so I'm a little confused. We send power to other states, but yet we get our power from outside of California. So why aren't the other states just like wherever we're getting it? Why aren't they going straight to Nevada? Why are they coming through California? Or is this something that sometimes we do this and sometimes we do that?
Well, in terms of the oil product, largely it's defined by the proximity that we have to the state of Oregon, to the state of Nevada. So our ability to get that product there is by virtue of them having some of similar demands in terms of getting the product, not having pipelines come into their states. Our ability to truck it over there is certainly a huge piece of it.
Okay. Another question has come in. California has dictated the demise of natural gas in California. I can't say that that's not a popular topic.
Yeah.
Is it even possible to meet these deadlines? And what about all the appliances that use natural gas? What's going to happen to those? Are they just going to go into the wasteland or what? So is it possible to meet these deadlines for reduction of natural gas?
Well, we see a lot of very aggressive deadlines and timelines, and we push back where we can. We saw a bill the last couple years by a Bay Area legislator who was looking to ban the internal combustion engine sale of new cars by 2045, and to be able to put these to be able to put these kinds of goals, very aggressive goals in the near term is and without having the market mechanisms to meet those or the plan in place to meet those, we think is misguided. Certainly you can have some aspirational goals, but to be able to, I think when it comes to natural gas, I think in terms of new homes and commercial property and not having access to natural gas, that's a huge issue that I don't think has caught on largely in a lot of areas yet, but you're seeing it happen in certain municipalities. And as people see how that impacts in terms of, as you asked, Sue, the kinds of appliances they can get, how they can heat their home, these types of questions, it's going to be, it's that reality is going to come home to roost, and that's going to be a real challenge. So I guess in answer to your question, rather than having bans without plans or these very hard and fast deadlines without, looking at the market and looking at the technology and having options in technology to produce, we think in terms of, going all in on electric is misguided. It needs to be an energy mix. There needs to be options. And there are options out there, and we're certainly exploring those in terms of renewables. Nuclear is another option out there, but they haven't really let the market go too far with that. Hydrogen is something that's still in its infancy. So there are a number of things, but to be able to put this kind of artificial deadline out there without having a little bit more of the feasibility of some of these technologies cooked, I think is something that needs to be, challenged.
Yeah. Yeah. We're getting close to the end of our time. I will say thank you, Councilmember Waddell, for sending everybody a website under energy.california.gov for the reports on the total electric generation in the system. But I do have, let's see, where is it? There's another one that just came in, and of course I can't find it, but I do have a message that says, thank you for laying out the regulations and taxes that the energy companies have to deal with. And I would agree with that. I appreciate that very much, Bob.
Yeah.
And I think we're getting close to the end of our time. And I know there was one other thing. Oh, yes, here it is. How many electric generating facilities? Oh, no, we got that one. Powered by natural gas are left in the state. Did we do that?
Yeah, you asked that one. And
yeah,
I think
you addressed that.
Here, we'll help on that one.
Yeah. Oh, here it is. What
Yeah.
other states have refineries that are in Western States Petroleum other than California? Washington?
Yeah, there's 5 up there. And Shell is still operable up there as a refinery, which Shell used to be in Martinez here, which is now PBF. But British Petroleum, U.S. Oil, Phillips 66. There's a number up there. So that's where we have a lot of our regional activity is Pacific Northwest, Bay Area, Southern California, and the Central Valley. So that's where we have some regional staff, and then the bulk of our kind of headquarters staff is in Sacramento. And the legislature definitely keeps us busy. I think COVID this year definitely had an impact in the number of bills we thought we were going to have to deal with. That certainly shrunk quite a bit, and but we know a lot of those measures that we saw in print that were pulled back are going to be back next year, including a California Green New Deal version and just a number of other measures that we've had a preview on this year that were held back. We're going to see come January.
Okay.
So that's.
Did you notice an immediate change when commuters were going online with COVID, with all the changes? I know. There was a swap from people who might have commuted on public transit that then had to go to their cars, but a lot just left their cars and were commuting from home or shorter distances. So was there a financial and industrial hit that you saw?
Absolutely. And it's why you saw a company like Marathon idle its refinery here in Martinez. Demand dropped drastically in March, April timeframe. It's come back in terms of people getting back into their cars. We've seen air travel, though, continue to take a huge drop. But when we saw it was over 50%, 60% airlines. So that travel hasn't come fully back. More people are working remotely. I think it might, change patterns. I see the Air District board members talking about it a lot more. You're seeing kind of working remote. Maybe people a little bit more reticent to go back onto BART, given the proximity. So, I think we heard on one of your recent Zoom meetings about BART demand and how that's dropped. So, yeah, it's definitely had an impact on people's daily lives in terms of commute, auto usage, and so forth. But anecdotally, I see more cars on the freeway in terms of the traditional rush hours, but certainly not like it was pre-March.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, that's about our time. Bob, I want to thank you very much. We'll give a
Thank
little
you.
applause here.
Thanks very much.
For those of you who tuned in late and may have missed a portion or you had to step away, you're welcome to view the replay on our website. Should be up in a couple of days. And the PowerPoint will also be available so that you can go back on that. I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. And if you are not currently a member of Contra Costa Taxpayers Association, I hope you consider it. Go to our website at www.CoCoTAX.org and join us. We could use your support, and we are happy to support the taxpayers of this county. So until our next session, I'm going to say, please be safe, be happy, and be well informed. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you.